Welcome everybody to our panel on how to grow your brand with creative. So for the next 45 minutes, that is the topic at hand. We have some awesome experts here that are going to introduce themselves in a second. And we are definitely going to ask for your active participation in the Q&A for this panel. We have some ideas of what we think is interesting around this topic, but we really do want to hear from you. So go to the Q&A tab, please, and you will Q and we will A. So now let's meet the folks. I'm Amy Strickland. I am your moderator for today. I am Chief of Staff and Senior Director of Marketing and Creative Ops at Sam's Club. And Erin.
Sure, yeah, I'm Erin. I'm on the product marketing team at Celtra. At Celtra, we help brands specifically transform and streamline their creative production process. So I'm excited to be here chatting with you guys today.
Awesome. I am also Erin. For the sake of this session, I'll be Erin Rose. I am a founding leader of the creative department at Chime. Chime is, let me think what my compliance team would want me to say. We are not a bank, but we are the largest competitor to traditional banking in the US right now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mari. I'm the creative director at Indochino. We're the largest made-to-measure custom apparel company in the world. I'm really excited to be on this panel and answer any questions that you may have.
And hey folks, I'm Ben. I'm the Director of Design at NOOM. I lead the product design team, and NOOM is a company that is dedicated to helping people live healthier and longer lives through better eating, which is accomplished through behavioral techniques.
Cool, awesome. Thanks, everybody. So for you folks in the audience and panelists, one of the things that we got to really quickly when this team got together to talk about this topic was really how critical storytelling is. If it wasn't before, it is even more so now. And also how that connects to growing the brand and to the growth of assets and your brand's story in the entire pipeline. So I'm going to first pass it to Mari. So Mari, can you talk a little bit about like why telling stories has been critical to your brand and how it's grown?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to kick off this first question. I think first and foremost, when we think about brand storytelling, it's really critical to be clear on your brand's purpose, right? And then letting those authentic and meaningful stories ladder up to that brand's purpose. So when I think about Indochino's brand, you know, I don't actually consider ourselves just a suit company. When I think about it and I kind of step back, you know, we're really all about the most important day in a guy's life, whether it's a job interview, you know, a really important social event or their wedding. We're really there to inspire that individuality and confidence for a guy and doing it through this elevated custom experience. And I think, you know, when I think about our customer base, it's like, they might not admit it, but I think guys actually really like looking good. So we're there to really be that brand to help support them and guide them through that experience. And when I think about, you know, Indochino's history, we have this great area of partnerships, you know, whether it's with athletes or celebrities, and we utilize that to tell our brand story. So recently, you know, with Trevor Lawrence, we partnered with him and he ended up becoming the #1 draft pick for the NFL. And our role with that partnership was to help him look good, you know, on one of the most important days of his life. And so through that experience, he was able to really take that customization experience and be suited up in the way that he wanted to as an individual. You know, he decided to sport an awesome green suit, you know, and have some Stan Smith sneakers to like match, you know, his personality. And it actually brought up a lot of discussion online. You know, some people loved it, some people hated it. But at the end of the day, you know, we weren't there to tell him what to wear. He was really able to like do what he wanted to do. And I think as a brand, you know, when you can be not just consistent with your message, but really bring that human and authentic aspect to it, I think you can have just really powerful storytelling.
Yeah, for sure. Relevance is such an important factor too. Ben, do you want to talk about how that's played out for NOOM, especially in light of a health emergency in the world?
Yeah, so like living healthy is, I think, more important for everybody right now. And the obviously the context in which we consider it is different. The ways that we interact with, health and eating are evolving and changing. We're home all the time. We're doing a lot of cooking. We're not going to the gym. We're figuring out new ways to work out. And of course, like, I think NOOM is there to be a partner with folks in this. And from my perspective, I am your friend on the product side. So we are actually building the stuff. And as far as I see it, like our goal so far has been to, I think, conceive of new and more interactive ways to present some of this content. So the mode in which you're consuming the content may have changed. It may have previously been you have 5 minutes free in between meetings, you're going to do a little reading on NOOM. Maybe now you're more willing to sink into some more interactive content, exploring formats like audio, exploring formats like video. How can we sort of meet people where they are, give people new and more interesting ways to consume content, push the format a little bit, especially the format, the way people have been interacting with our product. So beginning some of these experiments, building a design team now to kind of like push these formats and just try new things. It's a new world in healthcare. People are far more willing to engage in digital healthcare experiences, in consumer-directed healthcare experiences. And I think our goal is really to rise to meet that challenge.
I think it's interesting. I think I live somewhere in between Ben and Mari when I think about, so at Chime, my team really is working on those product feature launches. So when your teams are building those product features and new products, how are we building stories around those as we are launching them out to our member base? And so one thing right before we hopped on this call I was thinking about is the difference between narratives and stories. And so as a brand, you may have far less narratives than you do stories. And I think I heard this also on this call, but things laddering into one another. And so really, as a brand, it's our job to make sure we have clarity around what are our brand narratives and how do we use stories to ladder into that. And when I think of things like product feature launches, it's really easy to get stuck on what does a user need to know to engage with this product feature? What do they need to know? Just the bare bones to understand what it does and how they participate in the new usage of it. On our end, what we look at is how does it also ladder into the broader story that we're telling, the broader narrative that exists, and how are we telling members very cleanly so that they know and they can tell that story on our behalf? This feature is part of the mission of the company to make my life easier, to be supportive of me as a user. And so when I think of how do stories layer into the work that we do on a daily basis, we're constantly digging deeper. And it really forces us to look at why are we doing the work we're doing? Why are we making this product feature? How does it relate back to who we are as a company and what our mission is? And then how do we feed that out to our member base in the clearest possible way so that they have the ability to share in that storytelling?
Yeah, I think the other thing that we talked about that I found really interesting is that the story and the narrative can really be the drivers to scale quickly because it gives you a framework to hang it on, right? And it can allow you to sort of get everyone marching to the same direction and, potentially limit your rework, limit your starting over, limit your no, that's not it, if you can get that alignment up front. Erin, talk about how you see your clients sort of streamlining and using those frameworks.
Yeah, I think, I think as everyone here has mentioned, and that, everyone maybe on this call can agree, is that building a powerful story is, the most important step probably. And it's really invaluable to have a really powerful story. I think it's interesting, Mari mentioned, it's not just about being consistent, but it's, about that authenticity. And I think, the way I look at it in thinking about how we work with brands is the brand consistency is almost the lowest common denominator, but it actually still poses quite a big challenge for brands when they're trying to scale their story. So I think that's the piece where we're trying to, we're trying to use tools to actually solve for kind of these repetitive or lowest, like the tasks that you have to have in place no matter what, in order to then focus on really the creative story. So I think that's, one of the main challenges that we do address with our clients and brands that we work with is, making sure that their story is consistent across the board, and that they have the tools and processes in place that allows them that visibility and that holistic view on that, so that then they don't have to really consider they don't have to consider scale or any of those factors when they're thinking about their actual creative concept and their story. So we don't think that the implications of scale, there shouldn't be implications or negative implications of scale on the actual story that you're creating and the narrative that you are looking to tell.
So there's growth and scale and, the need for these frameworks, but underlying all of that too is the need for that story to really be relevant to the people that you want to talk to. There's a question in here for Mari, sort of, with Indochino, how did you guys stay relevant and alive with content during the last year and pandemic when people went from looking dapper to wearing joggers and relaxing? How do you think about that challenge?
I know, that's a great question. One thing that was really interesting, this is maybe a two-part, but we were actually looking to launch a multi-million-dollar campaign 2 weeks before the pandemic hit. And so, obviously we hold, and, life was put on hold, companies were put on hold. But the one thing that we were actually able to leverage was the weddings industry. And so although weddings were postponed, we actually found an up growth in the amount of micro weddings and, elopements and weddings that were still happening. And so what we decided to do is actually tap into the weddings business. And up until now, seasonally, we always had growth in our sales because of weddings. But during the pandemic, we surprisingly saw week over week growth. So, given creative restraints and, the inability to put on photo shoots, we were like, what are we going to do? So we actually looked into our UGC content. And, luckily we had thousands of photos that we were tagged in online. And wedding photography is always so beautiful. And, as much as a creative director can stage a wedding, there's nothing more beautiful than seeing the authentic emotions that come out of weddings and seeing the different situations that were relevant, seeing these amazing elopements, on cliffs and beautiful mountain backdrops. And it was really interesting from a social perspective, but then also from us learning to adapt in that situation. So we were able to leverage that, and it really helped us to humanize, our stories. And then again, still have content that we could use to help bring our weddings campaign to life. So we revamped our website. We created a new Indochino Weddings Instagram account, right, to drive more visibility online. And in terms of the showroom experience as well, a lot of our showrooms were still open during the pandemic, but we were able to really focus on that as a priority for our business. So that's how we adapted during COVID.
Great. There's a question, a clarification that we should probably do before we go much further, and that is, how do you think about what's the difference between the narrative and the story? Anybody want to take that one? Erin Rose?
Yeah, I think the narrative is it's more overarching, right? So it's if you take Chime, for example, again, hashtag not a bank, but we have a tagline that we've leaned into for years that is banking that has your back. And so this overarching narrative is that Chime is a company that looks out for you, that takes care of its members, that puts them first and really has people's well-being front of mind. That's an overarching narrative. Stories that layer into that are product features that we've launched that very specifically support that. So we launched something called Spot Me Boosts, where there's a viral element where members can actually send each other like additional overdraft protection. So that's just another way that we allow you to support one another and to be supported. And then there's stories that come out of that where somebody sent a boost to their mom, or somebody got 3 boosts that month and they were able to get a cup of coffee and a tank of gas right before their next paycheck hit. And so those stories ladder up into that broader narrative. So you can have product stories, you can have member stories. There's the UGC content is huge right now. So there's a lot of different ways things kind of layer down into this level, but the narrative it's your North Star, I think I would say.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's a great follow on here for Ben, and that is, how do you create the narrative for your clients while also showcasing the more detailed and complex sort of features and parts of your UI? How do you make sure that those things are aligned?
So there's a lot of collaboration amongst, I think, digital product folks and brand folks. It gets overlooked in some organizations, I think, to the detriment of the broader experience for users. Because like what we have to consider is that from the consumer's perspective, they don't look at a campaign and say, I love this thing, nor do they look at a product and say, I love this brand, right? Consumers judge a brand by the sum of all touch points. And I think it's important to note that we no longer build individual products. You no longer buy a piece of software in a box and take it home. My toothbrush connects to an app on my phone and orders replacement heads. We're building services, right? And services are a complex interaction of brand, of marketing, of digital product, of physical product, of services, of retail locations, of campaigns. And this is really in some ways a new precedent over the previous way we've been designing and building standalone products, standalone services, and it needs to be conceived of as such. In my experience, many organizations are still not well equipped to do this because experience really starts at the inception point of brand awareness, the first out of home, the first Facebook ad you see, the first YouTube pre-roll, the first time your friend says, hey, check this company out, it's great. And it's comprised of every touch point that the user interacts with past that, right? And this is like digital channels, every kind of like moment of truth, if you want to take it back to some of that. The important thing, I think, is that this holistic experience, which is both sort of like pre and post transaction, defines the brand. And the experience, the campaigns, the product, the stories, the narrative, these things are fluid, they're ever changing, they're influenced by like sometimes seemingly like invisible forces, but at the end, like it's got to be dissected and it's really got to be like proactively designed. And especially as technology spills over to new and different channels, it's getting more complex. But this is sort of important, and that's kind of a wordy way of saying like, let's collaborate and let's look at the big picture, because that's the way consumers see it. They don't see individual pieces. They do see a narrative, but they see it through sort of like little chunks that need to play together.
Yeah, alignment and sort of collaboration across boundaries is definitely a topic that is important for all of us, and it's especially important for speed, right, and volume, because you need for those skids to sort of be greased. Mari, how does that work in your world with cross-functional? Do you work with merchandising? Like, what are those cross-functional relationship collaborations for you?
Yeah, so at Indochino, the creative director actually reports into the chief revenue officer, and he manages the director of e-com, director of marketing, product, as well as customer experience. So really like the 5 sort of heads of those departments kind of ladder into, okay, how is the business gonna move forward, right? And I gotta say, collaboration is a challenge. I think in any company that you work at, whether it's, you know, differences in personalities, differences in ideas, but at the end of the day, I think if you have a very strong brief and you have a very strong, like, singular idea, right, that can become more complex, but having that high level singular idea, I feel has always been very successful for Indochino, working cross-functionally. So we really boil down the brief to be one sentence to start, and then everything else sort of like ladders and trickles down to that. And, you know, whenever we're doing reviews and approvals, if whether you're on the product team or whether you're, you know, coming at it from an e-com standpoint, if things don't match that singular idea, then that's the objective way of, you know, saying, okay, no, it's not going to work, or whatnot. So I think for us, regardless of all of the cross functions that we work with, I think the brief really, like Erin Rose had said, is the North Star for us.
Yeah, I think, sorry,
No,
Erin Rose,
please.
just to chime in really briefly, I think it's interesting because, as Mari mentioned, when I think of the brands that we work with that are really successful in telling that story and telling that story, bringing it to life at scale, I think it really does come down to having a really systematic way of working. I think that's kind of how I've been able to summarize it. And whether, you know, regardless of the organizational structure, as Mari mentioned as well, I think, you know, there's some organizations where they're very decentralized in terms of different teams and how they work. But then also, you know, within global organizations who have users across multiple markets, those multiple markets are then what adds another level of complexity in personalizing and localizing the story. So I think there are different ways where that that alignment or that collaboration maybe come into play. But I do think, you know, what we've seen as well is it's really about having a systematic way of working, whether that is like that singular idea or it's, you know, something else, but some way that streamlines those workflows and consolidates the entire process so that there are, you know, checkpoints or there is alignment across the board.
Yeah, I think I was just kind of, as everybody was talking, thinking, you know, there's so many things that have to be solved at this high level, and they're systematic or organizational. But also for anybody on the call, like, I think we should never be afraid to also solve these things at whatever level we're at and whatever tier we can dig in on. So one thing that I think has been kind of fascinating in my time at Chime is that my org actually my team started within product, reporting up through design, and then was shifted into marketing. But because we were kind of born in that way, and we've grown much since then, but our design reviews are holistic. So our design reviews encompass both product design and creative marketing design. And that, even though it's kind of at the like ground level, because we're talking about the execution phase, it's no longer planning or strategy or any of these up here things, it's this level. But at that ground level, product designers are seeing the marketing work, marketing designers are seeing the product, and we actually make so much traction in making sure that that's holistic, that it's well considered from both sides. Sometimes we're like, wait, you're working on that? We're working on the same thing and we didn't even know. And that just happens. There's no silver bullet. Companies, like, that's never going to go away. But I think we should all feel empowered wherever we are to dig in and solution and advocate for our work, because we're not always going to get to push it all the way up to this level.
And to underline that, like, so look at a process like that from a consumer point of view, it just like adds so much value, because design, you know, be it an advertising campaign or be it digital product, design is the filter through which the consumer experiences everything about your brand. You know, technology is experienced through design, content is experienced through design, value is perceived through design. And the sort of cognitive dissonance in like tapping through from a Facebook ad that says one thing to a landing page that says another thing, or opening up the app and seeing a different experience, like, it's hard to measure that, but the cumulative effect of those like little bits being off, I really do think is detrimental to the experience and enjoyment of a brand over time.
Yeah.
I'm going to take us in a slightly different direction. So, when we think about the explosion of volume, right, in relation to speed, there's a question here that is effectively asking, do you find yourself doing more light lift stuff than before COVID and less big, heavy, long-term heavy lift stuff, mega campaigns, as opposed to, campaign bites that are testable and learnable? Have you seen any shift in the approach in any of your businesses? Mari, I know you said that you guys were about to launch a really big campaign. Is that still something that would play into the current strategy?
Yeah, so I mean, interesting. So I believe prior to me coming on, Indochino had more priority setting in terms of like quarterly goals, right? And during pandemic, it basically became a month-to-month thing, because who knows what the world was going to look like in 4 months. No one knew, right? And I think the important thing for us was we knew that at some point the pandemic was going to end, right? And people were going to be eager to post-pandemic be excited to dress up again and go out and have these big weddings or whatever. And so that campaign that never launched actually sat on the cutting room floor for the last year. And we've now revisited in the last 2 or 3 months, and we're rejigging it a bit. And we've redesigned the brief so that it's more relevant to launch. I think we're planning to launch in June, July. And it's got a completely new spin on it, completely different tone, same footage, but it's interesting from a creative standpoint, because you might not always have the luxury of reshooting something that may not be relevant anymore. So it was a creative challenge for us to say, okay, we have all this beautiful footage of guys looking amazing in suits. They're all, unique and individual. So from a brand perspective, it still aligns. But from a world relevancy standpoint, it didn't, right? So we've now kind of taken it from less of a concept around made for you and more around like a suit revolution. So what are you going to do when the world wakes up again, right? So that's been really fun from a creative standpoint. And I think, regardless of the constraints that you have, I think it's always important to look at your priorities and look at, is this little ask from HR or whoever it is going to help move the business forward, right? And you only have so many hours in the day. So it's just thinking about, what are your long-term priorities and not losing sight of those. And then still getting by with the day-to-day tasks.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really interesting pivot that you guys had to do. I know, Erin Rose, you talked about some of the pivots that you guys have also had to make in the current environment. You want to talk through one of those maybe?
Sure. Well, there's a very like parallel story, I think, at Chime. We were also in the midst of planning our next TV, and Chime is a high growth company. So we have historically lived in more of that like quick iterative learn and build approach than like, spend millions on a singular, putting all your eggs in one basket kind of approach. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And so we again also had to go like, okay, well, scrap everything about what we were just about to do, but we still need to get something on the air ASAP. And so I think a lot of companies actually did this, you'll notice, but like we went animation, right? You couldn't produce, you couldn't put bodies in a room, you couldn't have a shoot really, but you still needed to put something out. So we went animation. And one thing that was interesting is we did an animated video. It was our Better Banking for Everybody spot. And we really went hard on showcasing what do we mean when we say everybody, because we are a product for everyday Americans. And so we dug in and pulled actual data on what industries did we see our members showing up in the most. And we put them in our spots to really show them themselves. And the agency probably wanted to get rid of me at one point because I was like, I don't want caricatures. If it looks like a caricature of a chef, out. Like I want it to look like someone that you look at and go like, oh, I think that looks like someone I know, like that reminds me of someone. So it was really human, even though it was a cartoon. And so that was kind of our pivot. And I think it was, again, like it's not so much the like heavy lift versus light lift, because I think we've always been in that iterative approach as a high growth company, but really, how do you stay agile and nimble and willing to reprioritize and roll with it? Like there's a human grit and agility factor in here where you just got to be willing to roll your sleeves up. And so you need a team and a culture of people that are empowered to roll their sleeves up, change their minds, and do the thing that is next. And the only other thing I want to tack onto this is I'm hearing a theme that I believe in wholeheartedly is building brands that are flexible. And so you are not a cookie cutter version of yourself. That's not what we mean when we talk about consistency. You have a personality the same way that I would wear a different outfit to this than I would to a baseball game. But I think, you know, hard to hide the blonde patch, like you'd still know I'm me. And so how do we do that as brands? How do you show up in the place relevant to where you are in a way that is flexible enough that people still recognize you? But in a time like COVID, we needed to be able to turn around and put out really empathetic messaging. But if you check out Chime on Instagram, like we are kitschy and cultural and fun. And that's a spectrum that we can walk because of the flexibility and humanity and authenticity that we've built into our brand.
Sure. So I'm going to ask sort of my wrap-up question, because I'm hoping that it'll drive some how do you think about that, or how do you go about that questions. So I'm gonna ask each of you in the context of the topic at hand, which is how to grow your brand with creative and all the things we've talked about under that today. I want our audience to be able to take, you know, a tidbit away with them today. So Erin, I'll start with you. What would you like to leave this audience with at the end of this session today that they should take seriously and actually be able to execute?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what I touched on before, but I do think, you know, just thinking of brands that are really good at bringing their stories to life and being creative. I think that the systematic way of working is really important, and I think with that, from just our standpoint at Celtra, we've seen, you know, there tends to be a preconceived notion about adopting technology, and that, you know, it will reduce the quality of creative, right? That technology and creative kind of can be contradictory in some ways. But really the way that we've thought about it and the way that we've been working with brands is actually using technology to support the collaboration and you know, being able to scale creative without compromising on quality, actually. So in reality, the way we're thinking about it is the technology is what supports, is allowing you the tools to adopt a systematic way of working, and to streamline the workflows and maybe, you know, even automate as much of kind of the repetitive tasks as you can. But not necessarily, we don't think that, you know, technology is replacing by any means the creative. True creative, or really, you know, the creative concept behind the brand. I think, you know, that piece really isn't invaluable, and it really does come back to being relevant and to being authentic, and that's not something that technology can really replace by any means. I think we can all agree on that. And I think the other thing is, I think it goes hand in hand, is Erin Rose also mentioned this, but being flexible and agile. So I think, you know, this is something that comes up a lot, but, you know, being really quick to test and iterate and make changes on the fly, and change, you know, the way that you are speaking to users based on their feedback and based on what resonates. So I think there's just so much to try out, and there's a lot to figure out in terms of what works for your particular brand. So again, I think it does come back to having a way of working that supports that allows you to be agile and flexible.
Sure, and you need to know what the rules are before you can legitimately break them, right? And sort of sort of restructure the way you work or the way that your brand is presented. Ben, what are your words of wisdom for our illustrious audience?
Yeah, so I guess like first and foremost, just consider your experience as a whole. Tools like journey maps from the UX perspective really help this, kind of visualizing the journey. See yourself the way your users see you. And just remember, like the best, campaigns or the best app in the world means nothing if you call customer service and like don't get a good resolution. So like the whole thing is like one big journey in the eyes of the customer. And a lot of the time it means like solving problems for the business by solving problems for the customers. So from a, I think, content perspective too, I want to double down on the point about being flexible and being agile. Try being lean on purpose. Maybe this means reconsidering big campaigns. Maybe it's considerations in your product. Is content easy to update? This really came in handy for NOOM during COVID. Our content is lightweight, it's web-based. We could jump in, we could easily edit it, we could easily make it adapt to the times. And I think all of these like contributed to sort of like build something that was maybe not as polished as a big campaign would have been, but a big campaign would also not have been possible at the beginning of COVID. So that really served us well. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great advice. Erin Rose?
And so much good stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
My brain is just a Twitter with competing thoughts, but I'll say that I think one, I think the consistent through line here is like flexibility and like flexibility in your processes. And that's not to say don't operationalize everything you can with the flexibility to pivot and change and do what you need to do to get things done. Don't be a slave to your operations. Have the ability to flex, and that flexibility then also is, as we talked about, in your brand. As the world changes around us, so does our role. So does the tone that we can take. I thought that was an interesting, like something we didn't really talk about much. But you have narratives, you have stories, you also have tone. Your tone can change while the narrative stays the same. But if the tone changes, the story changes. So like these things are all very interconnected. But so I guess my final parting words are like, done is better than perfect. I'll just go out on that.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's something that Ben talked about too, in terms of balancing efficiency with quality. Sort of the two sides of that scale. I think that's a great takeaway. Perfect. Mari?
Nobody will look at your content as hard and close as you look at it.
Exactly.
Sure.
I'm like,
Yeah,
when we're all debating where the comma goes, I'm like, we've gone too far, you guys. Like, let's just show it.
So true. So for me, I think my takeaway is I'm going to speak a bit on creative leadership. So, I have a bachelor in science and design. So I'm always like fighting the internal struggle of, the data side of me and the business side, and then the very creative side. And I think when I think about creativity, it doesn't matter what your role is, right? At the end of the day, it really is, any department or any role that you're in, I think creativity needs to play a role in that. And I think, just because you might be on the creative team also, on the flip side, doesn't mean that you can't have insights into the business and know your data and learn about creative testing and how to measure your creative. So that then when you are having, conversations with other departments, you can speak their language and vice versa. So my takeaway is always look left and right. So always be aware of other things, not just creative.
Cool. Now I want to like layer one thing. Can I do that? I'm
Yeah,
go ahead.
But that gave me good. I truly believe that great creative is it's objectively good. This is not subjective. People say this, like, oh, how do you know creative is subjective? No, it's not. It's absolutely not. It is fully measurable by data, insights, social listening. We have all the tools available to us these days. So creative should be brought to the table and should show up to the table, expected to play just the same way that anybody else plays. Like we are equals, but we should be held accountable to that data.
Yeah. Love it.
I think I would add to that, anyone who knows me knows that metrics are kind of my thing. And regardless of where you are, audience, on your creative operations and production journey, you can do metrics. You may not have a tool, but I guarantee you've got a notebook and a pencil. And the more things that you can count, the more data you will have. And the more data you have, the more credibility you have with your peers and your leaders, and particularly across those cross-functional boundaries. So I think if I had a takeaway, and I think about how to the challenges in getting everything done as quickly and as at the volume levels of volume that we do, the one thing we all need is more help, whether that's from whether that's air cover from our leadership, or whether that's resourcing, and using data is one really guaranteed way to sort of get both of those things at the same time. So I think that would be one of my takeaways. We do have a couple of minutes left, and I want to throw out the topic of prioritization. There's a question here, and we touched on it in a couple of the other topics, but I think the question is really, what is your approach to ruthlessly prioritizing for yourself, your operation, your team, from the distractions that inevitably come out of left field? What is your approach to that? Anybody want to touch that one?
This is a big question for the last 4 minutes.
I'm sure there must be one single right answer, right?
Oh man.
No.
I mean, so I guess this is a challenge across, like there's so many ways to slice this pie. Is that a saying? I don't know.
Yeah.
But
it is now.
Like there's prioritization at the company level, right? So like that's something that I think companies really owe to their employees, is to, at the highest possible level, prioritize, and we're usually looking at impact, right? Like where are we going to get the most impact? For my team at the level we're at, that's what I'm usually asking for, is effort to impact ratio. How much effort does this take versus how much impact does it give us? And how are we prioritizing based on that knowledge? And sometimes it's education of people who don't understand the function of what your team does, or all of the other things on their plate. And so sometimes it might take 30 minutes out of my day to save my team 10 hours of unnecessary work, to sit with somebody and educate them on why something that sounds like a great idea, because it's like, is not something that, because we have creative in our title, that's a good use of our time right now based on our staffing. So I don't know, it's my spattering of answers.
I would add to that too, that from the keynote, that frameworks of thinking about things like 777 that Heidi brought up, those can actually help with prioritization, because it'll give you these buckets of where things fit in the grand scheme of things, and helps you sort of identify what needs attention at any given time. I would close with that. Well, thank you, illustrious panel, Erin Rose, Mari, and Ben. I hope the audience has appreciated our dialogue. I know that I have. So thanks again for joining the panel today, and you're off the hook.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much. It's been great.
Bye.